Night had fallen on one of the ordinary cities, and there were no signs hinting at the events that were about to unfold. A massive crack appeared in the sky, resembling a hole in a window or a mirror after a large stone had been thrown. Streams of blue energy began to flow as if from a magnificent waterfall. The city's inhabitants, mesmerized, watched this sight that was both beautiful and terrifying. A small child stepped out onto the balcony, unable to sleep, and was drawn to the bright light shining through the window. The child called out to her mother to witness the wonder happening from her room. The energy, later known as mana, affected humans. It was this mana that enabled a few chosen individuals to awaken and discover their extraordinary powers. The mana storm, as it was called, ended as abruptly as it had appeared in the night sky. Only the huge crack in the sky remained to remind everyone of this inexplicable phenomenon. Similar events occurred worldwide, and people became accustomed to these awakenings. However, alongside the emergence of individuals with superpowers, there also appeared a significant threat to the world. The military warned citizens not to approach the gates that suddenly opened in the middle of the street. A guard noticed a change in the hum of the gate, which did not bode well. The portal's color shifted from a calming blue to a blood red, and ominous sounds warned of impending danger. Finally, a giant creature emerged from the gate, a cross between a giant and a demon, its body adorned with various marks. It turned out to be a true giant, 10 times larger than an ordinary human. The military was powerless against this colossal foe. The people gathered at the gate fled in panic from the monster that appeared. It wasn't long before the giant left only bloodstains on the street from the soldiers. Spectators who had previously been curiously recording the opening of the gate now ran in terror, calling for help. Only one person walked against the crowd, standing firm in such a situation as if dealing with similar gates was a daily routine for him. The man was unafraid of the red light or the size of the monster emerging from the gate. The transformed giant raised its club above the man who dared to challenge him. The man looked at the deadly threat with a smile, not even considering fleeing the battlefield. Shin hoped to change his life after he awakened. The man ran through an ice cave, with threatening sounds from the strange creature echoing behind him. He turned to see his pursuer and tried to assess how much the situation had spiraled out of control. The ice monster chased the man, and it was only a few steps before the giant and Shin were finished. The boy thought he only wanted to live peacefully where no one could steal from or hit him, but all his allies died horribly. They had nothing to combat this unexpected threat. Shin created a magical sword in his hand and turned to face the monster. He hurled the dagger with all his might at the giant ice monster, hoping to inflict even the slightest damage. However, the sword merely bounced off the monster's thick skin made of pure ice. The magical weapon ricocheted off the creature's body and stuck to the ceiling of the ice cave. The monster quickened its pace, intending to finish Shin with one strike. The monster missed, slamming its massive claw into the ground beside the man with tremendous force. Thick cracks spread across the ground beneath the hero's feet. Finally, the ground beneath the man's feet opened up, and he fell into the forming chasm. As he fell, Shin wished for one true friend in his short life. With a high splash, he plunged into a small lake at the bottom of the hidden underground cave. Instinctively, Shin tried to take a deep breath, but of course, this wasn't possible underwater. His consciousness slowly faded as he felt close to his last breath. Suddenly, a bright blue light appeared before his eyes, and the flow of mana captured his attention. The ice monster left the battlefield, thinking it had successfully defeated the man who troubled it. However, the sound from the chasm created by its strike made the monster turn back. The creature wasn't very intelligent, but even it understood that its enemy seemed to be rising to the surface. Meanwhile, Shin emerged from the lake and crossed the distance from the pool to the hole in the ground using a weapon made of pure energy as a foothold. When he reached the surface, Shin froze in front of the giant ice monster. The monster raised its hands above the man's head, trying to finish him off once and for all. But Shin did not want to die helpless. His eyes were filled with blue light from mana. Suddenly, dozens of blades pierced the monster's body, created by the boy's ability. Those sharp energy blades practically split the monster in two, leaving deep wounds all over its body. The monster fell on its back, struck by Shin's unexpected and powerful attack. The man, almost out of strength, stood over the defeated monster's body, trying to comprehend the last few minutes that had passed. Suddenly, the monster's eyes flared with fire and its body began to move. Shin's defensive reaction didn't take long. Without realizing it, he again used the mana flowing through his veins. Dozens of energy blades appeared around him, ready to finish off the ice monster once and for all. After the final seconds of the fight, a mysterious interface appeared in front of Shin's eyes, informing him that the conditions to become a player had been met. Wearing ordinary sneakers, Shin passed through the dense forest. He was almost exhausted but did not stop on his journey toward his goal. Finally, Shin ran to the place where two young people were already waiting for him. The girl was skilled at dealing damage in close combat, and the man in armor acted as a tank, with heavy armor visible on his back. The knight said that he was also late on his first mission when he was young. Shin apologized for being late, sweat dripping from his forehead, and he could barely breathe. However, his companions reassured him, saying he was only a few minutes late and the campaign had not yet started. Shin was worried. He had only joined the guild 3 months ago and was already late for his first flying mission. The group moved toward the gate, and the knight and the girl discussed what they would do after completing the mission. For Shin, this was his first dungeon exploration as support, and it was important for him to prove his usefulness not only to the team but also to the group as a whole. At the entrance to the dungeon, Shin met the group leader, an experienced hunter with half of his face hidden behind a cloth mask. Moon Do-yoon asked if Shin had ever participated in a mission like this before or if this was his first attempt. Shin replied that he had been to several dungeons as an assistant, but this was his first time as support. Moon Do-yoon explained that Shin should keep an ideal distance. If too close to the center of the battle, there was a high chance he would suffer severe damage. If too far, the team would not have time to help him, and the consequences would be dire. Moon Do-yoon asked Shin to stay alert and use his skills in weapon creation. The group leader was an assassin, and he asked Shin to make a dagger. With only a gesture needed and nothing more, Shin was just in a situation to clarify whether it was necessary to make weapons for the rest of the group. However, the assassin assured him that the dungeon was not difficult and Shin need not worry too much, as only one would receive enough support. The mage asked the group to stop and activated a skill to search for living creatures and sense the monsters ahead. Moon Do-yoon ordered them to prepare for battle, hold the line, and watch the situation closely. The assassin asked the mage to explain the number of creatures sensed and the level of monsters awaiting them. The mage sensed 3 small auras and 1 large enough to be the dungeon boss. Moon Do-yoon asked Shin how long it would take to make a dagger, and the man answered that it would take about a second. The assassin asked him to start making it because, in 1 second, he planned to deal with the boss with his skill. Finally, the team reached a room guarded by a giant crystal lizard, and the creature saw the hunters and immediately attacked. They wanted to tear the invaders apart. Immediately, the tank prepared to withstand the attack, and the girl heated her fists, planning to fight well. The knight activated a skill, and a stream of energy covered his entire body. A clicking sound like electricity was heard in the air. Finally, the skill was ready, enhancing the tank's attributes and lifting his shield above his head. In 1 second, he lowered the shield forcefully and stuck it to the ground, and a shockwave spread throughout the room, scattering the lizards in different directions. The girl did not stay idle. She was ready for action, jumping and preparing a powerful punch, her fist whistling through the air. Finally, she unleashed all her strength on the unfortunate lizard's face standing in her way. Lucy performed a stunning acrobatic move, leaping over the unconscious monster's body. Her punch so powerful that when she landed, the monster's body was still suspended in the air. The girl turned to check on the others and saw that the lizard she had struck had already recovered and, along with the other opponents, was preparing to attack the tank. The monsters quickly closed the distance. The girl warned of the impending attack and shouted to draw the attention of her allies. The knight took a defensive position, and the wizard began to chant a spell. A fireball appeared in the wizard's upraised palm. He shouted in an unfamiliar language and started to attack. Dozens of fireballs exploded from the wizard's hands and flew toward the attacking monsters. The room was illuminated by the bright light from the powerful explosions created by the spell. The fire's temperature was so high that it left only the ashes of the lizards floating in the air for a moment before gently falling to the ground. The wizard rejoiced, as he always worried in such critical moments because the fate of the entire team depended on her. Shin thought that the team acted very cohesively, like members of the same guild. A magical dagger formed in his hands, and the hilt was almost ready. The assassin urged him to hurry, and Shin thought that this was not the time to be distracted by the team's actions. Finally, the weapon was ready. Shin held the dagger by its hilt and checked the quality of the blade. He shouted to Moon Do-yoon that he had finished crafting the item and threw the weapon towards the assassin. Moon Do-yoon slightly twisted to follow the weapon with his eyes and deftly caught the blade in his hand. A dark flash flowed from the hilt to the blade as the assassin used a special skill to enhance the weapon. The blade finally emitted a powerful aura as if the object were made of pure shadow energy. Moon Do-yoon closed the distance, running toward the boss, and prepared for a lethal blow. The assassin made a quick leap, and with a slight movement of the shadow weapon, he slit the giant lizard's throat. The beheaded head fell behind the sly assassin with a perfect strike. The weapon melted in the captain's hand, the shadow energy being so powerful that it made the weapon a one-time use item. The team gathered and asked each other if there were any casualties, but in this battle, there were no fatalities and not even any injuries. Shin felt he was in a good environment and had not even expected each of them to have such skills. He was very impressed by the well-coordinated teamwork that allowed them to complete the battle quickly and effectively. Shin felt useless compared to them. He barely influenced the outcome. He blamed himself for almost not having enough time to make even one dagger and being distracted by others' actions. Shin thought he hardly deserved to be in such a coordinated team, and his skills were very weak. Shin was awakened from his heavy thoughts by the voice of Moon Do-yoon asking if he was okay. Shin felt embarrassed and said that he survived thanks to the team's actions and that he was practically useless. However, Moon Do-yoon ignored Shin's doubts and said that thanks to his weapon-making skills, he saved a lot of money. Although the shadow enhancement caused significant damage, it absorbed the weapon after one use, so the assassin thanked Shin for saving resources and ensuring he didn't have to worry. He praised Shin for his help, especially on his first successful mission in the dungeon. The assassin needed a team member with weapon-making skills and asked Shin not to give up and to continue improving his skills. The tank cut the conversation short and proposed to start collecting loot and return home. Suddenly, the walls of the dungeon shook and the heroes could barely stand. The wizard warned that the cave might begin to collapse after the boss was destroyed and that the team needed to hurry. Shin noticed something and pointed with his finger, his voice drowned out by the rumble of the earthquake. The team turned and saw a section of the ice wall collapsing under the vibrations and revealing a path. The wizard lit the way with his staff and carefully inspected the open area. After finishing his analysis, he turned to the team and said that the path connected to the cave's interior. The team leader thought about the wizard's words and looked at the opening, doubting whether it was worth exploring the mysterious path. However, the tank was already imagining the treasures located at the end of that secret cave and wanted to explore it. The girl joined in and offered to quickly check what was hidden on the newly opened path. The wizard reported that he didn't sense the aura of a single living creature ahead. The team leader gave in to the team's insistence and thought there was no harm in gathering additional loot. The wizard didn't fully agree with the leader's decision, but he agreed to continue the journey into the cave. The assassin invited the new character to join, thinking that the additional treasure would benefit the entire team. The team casually stepped into the open entrance, excited about the chance to earn extra money. Suddenly, the terrifying mask of an ice giant appeared out of nowhere, shocking the entire team. Shin screamed to flee from the golem chasing them ever faster. Shin could not understand how he could survive. He couldn't believe that such a dangerous opponent appeared in a low-level dungeon. Shin's team of heroes was crushed in an instant. Furthermore, the wizard hadn't even sensed such a strong enemy inside the dungeon. As he continued to run, Shin slightly turned to see how far he was, but the ice golem chased behind him, ready to capture its prey. The monster used a powerful skill and slammed the ground in front of it. The force of the blow was so great that Shin was swept away by the energy wave and lost his balance. Shin fell backward, hitting the ground with his back, and blood splattered from his mouth. Struggling to get up, Shin rested on his right hand and nearly lost consciousness. The golem kept chasing, and the distance between them quickly closed. With the last of his strength, Shin created a weapon with his skill, trying to fight the monster by any means. The sorcerer didn't strike the hero's golem directly but instead hit the ground beneath it, creating a large chasm that caused Shin to fall, knocking the wind out of him. The hero could only let out a desperate sigh. He fell into an underground tank, feeling despair as his low level prevented him from using healing skills. Shin choked on the icy water, realizing that this was how the death he had most feared would come. The comrades he had just met flashed before his eyes. Shin thought he had found the team he needed, but he wasn't good enough to save them. The hero thought it might be better not to wake up since he had disappointed so many people. Suddenly, an interface appeared before the hero's eyes, indicating that he had met all the requirements to become a player. A bright light illuminated the underground tank, and a mysterious power filled the man's body. He tried to breathe in the water, but only bubbles came out of his mouth. The interface informed the player that a reward awaited for completing the mission, and the hero barely understood what was happening. Shin tried to take another breath, but the icy water only flowed into his lungs. Without comprehending whether this was reality or the illusion of death, the hero decided to accept the reward. He tried to press the right button on the floating interface before his eyes with the last of his strength. He reached out his hand as his body sank deeper into the abyss of darkness. Still able to use the interface, a flow of mana allowed Shin to create a ladder from weapons formed by his skills. The hero appeared before the ice monster he thought he had defeated, but it seemed Shin was starting to regain his strength with the help of a sudden second wind. The golem let out a loud roar of anger, clearly displeased with the outcome of the battle. The hero's eyes glowed blue, and fear and despair were replaced by determination to destroy the enemy. In an instant, Shin created a nest of energy swords that quickly flew toward the monster. The blades pierced the golem's body, causing massive damage, and the monster fell on its back. Shin held his head, something strange happening within his body and mind. Hundreds of memories filled the hero's brain suddenly, and he couldn't understand where they came from. A loud noise distracted the hero from his thoughts. He lifted his bloodshot eyes and saw the golem launching a new attack, raising its massive fist. The monster's hand came down, and Shin wouldn't have survived the blow if not for the magic shield he managed to create just before the deadly strike. landed. The man wondered how he could remain unharmed against such a powerful creature, but the hero's skills were too weak to withstand the ancient monster's strength for long, and the shield shattered into pieces. Shin narrowly avoided the monster's threatening fist, leaping to a safe distance. Memories from a previous life told the man that this type of golem had no specific weaknesses. As if to confirm the hero's thoughts, the monster launched a new attack with a loud roar. The man's eyes turned turquoise again, seemingly connecting with a network to read data. The only way to defeat the golem was by using network skills. In this case, traps were set around the monster, allowing him to damage it from all sides simultaneously. The golem was easily trapped and entered the energy cage in an attempt to close the distance. Shin seized the opportunity and clenched his fist, commanding the magic swords to attack the monster. Dozens of swords hovered above the ice golem and sped up, rushing toward the enemy. The cave space lit up with a bright light as if a powerful explosion had occurred within the cunning trap. The monster shattered into pieces, its head separated from its body with a look of surprise frozen on its face. Barely surviving the uneven battle, the hero approached the defeated enemy's body and sighed. He had never used network skills offensively before and thought his abilities had significantly improved. An interface appeared before Shin's eyes, allowing the hero to view information about the dungeon or the monster. Suddenly, a purple energy mass emerged above the defeated enemy and was carefully examined by the hero. The mass smoothly flowed into the hero's hand, forming a perfectly round bubble in his palm. The system informed Shin that he had activated the passive mana absorption skill. Gradually, memories from another life began to emerge in the hero's mind, seemingly from the future. He saw himself standing in the middle of a city street in 2 years, destroyed either by powerful magic or disaster. The setting sun cast its first rays on the ruined buildings that seemed to have shifted from their usual places. The vision showed the terrifying impact of a disaster. The world had fallen, and the defenders of humanity were clearly losing the battle against an unknown enemy. Shin thought that this might be a vision of the future, but the flow of events didn't necessarily have to repeat in reality. He used the interface to view the list of available options and pondered the upcoming disaster he might be able to prevent. Finally, Shin acknowledged that he had become a gambler, identified as a rare representative of future hunters who would be summoned as chosen players. However, at this moment, their existence was not yet known. Based on the hero's new memories, in 2 years, the first awakened players would appear. The system introduced these superhumans not only with a graphical interface but also with various skill or performance enhancements. Sometimes players also received rewards like chests containing artifacts never seen before, leading to rapid progress in their own development and the growth of the guilds they joined. In the future, the hero did not become one of the chosen, but the presence of such individuals in his guild motivated him to train harder and achieve success. Shin noted that, as he suspected, the system was well suited to his observational skills and the amount of experience he had gained. A scale appeared before the hero's eyes, showing the amount of mana absorbed, but the man decided to think about it later. First, Shin needed to tend to the bodies of his fallen comrades, as he couldn't leave them in the cave. Nearly holding back tears, the man began to retrieve the team members who had been killed by the monster one by one. The hero sent the bodies to the headquarters of the Hunter Association, a large building that served as the center for researching and analyzing the first awakenings. Looking out of the headquarters window, a girl expressed doubt that the man should have been left alone so soon. They were talking about Shin, who was slowly returning home after one of the most challenging days of his life. The girl continued to speak, feeling that the case was very strange with many mysterious facts. He insisted that in the chaos that occurred in the dungeon, only a support hunter could have survived. The man himself wouldn't have been able to kill so many high-level comrades. The investigator gently tapped the girl on the head and asked her to calm down. He stated that it was impossible to verify any speculations because the door was already closed, and they needed to rely solely on the facts that emerged during the investigation. Casey asked if the girl had any specific suspicions, noting that cases like this were starting to appear more frequently. The investigator knew that hunters had begun sneaking into the doors because if they were found, the auction would start and weak guilds would not be able to clear the underground towers. He asked the girl to call the boys in for further questioning to clarify the situation. The investigator himself left the building, tying the tie hanging from his pocket. His workday was over and he continued walking down the street. Seeing the cover of a folder with a case involving a strange man, he remembered the man's name from a previous case. It seemed to him that this case was quite unusual, different from the ones he had investigated a few weeks ago. The investigator recalled that Shin remained very calm during the interrogation, which was unusual for people in such situations. Theoretically, the man should have been panicking, but he continued on. The gate leading to the anonymous category meant that someone was pretending to be a representative of the association, or that the Hunter Association itself was involved in suspicious activities. However, the most important concern for the hero was that such situations could occur not only in his guild. All the news summaries were filled with reports of missing people who woke up in other unknown gates, usually young and strong hunters like Moon Do-yoon. Shin's team realized the horrifying idea, and Shin's legs began to tremble. It seemed that someone had decided to eliminate the heroes from the face of the earth. The hero decided that it would be better to carefully hide his new abilities. Shin was already the sole survivor of an incident at the gate, and if he drew more attention, he would surely be eliminated. The hero shuddered at this thought, and now it seemed he would always be followed. Shin activated the interface and began planning his future. There were a few years left before players would appear, and Shin decided to spend them developing his current skills. He wanted to find at least one skill that would help him become stronger discreetly. Finally, he found a skill that met all his criteria and activated it with a smile. In the swampy forest, flashes of shining swords and powerful spells were visible, and the sound of a fierce struggle could be heard. A swordsman attacked a large human hyena hiding behind a heavy, sturdy wooden shield. The awakened sword broke from the forceful blow. A look of confusion appeared on the hero's face. With a powerful swing of the shield, the hyena sent the man flying, fortunate that the blow was not fatal. The air was knocked out of the hero's lungs, and a mixture of shock, fear, and anger was evident on his face. The man stabbed his sword into the ground to dampen the inertia of the blow and avoid being thrown to the other side of the forest. He jumped to his feet and looked up as if seeing a bird flying in the sky, but the giant hyena was leaping with a great bound towards its confused prey. The hero lost his composure for a moment, captivated by the monster's strength and agility. At the last second before the blow, the man managed to dodge the descending weapon of the monster. The hero's team had lost morale, and it was clear they had lost hope of defeating the monster on their own. The hyena began to close the distance, holding a large club in its right hand, which must have weighed at least 100 grams. This was the Gnoll Lord, who not only had increased resistance to physical attacks but also thick skin that repelled spells. The swordsman could not understand how a monster of this level could appear in a gate with such a low ranking. The Gnoll Lord started attacking again, and a terrifying roar erupted from its mouth, revealing sharp fangs. The team's tank, though trembling with fear, managed to reach the line of attack in time, protecting his friend from certain death with a large shield. Heavy hands trembled under the monster's pressure, and the weight and strength difference between the opponents was enormous. The tank shouted to the swordsman that he could not hold the overlord's pressure for long, and soon the rest of the team would be at risk of being killed. He urged the remaining team members to get up and try to deal at least minimal damage to the enemy. The swordsman continued to panic with thoughts in his head and realized that the Gnoll Lord was called the God of Death for low-level hunters for a reason. The man turned to the remaining team and thought that the desert would not help them in this fight. Even the battle mage was trembling with fear, gripping his wooden staff tightly. The swordsman realized that he had made a mistake in choosing the team, relying too heavily on magical damage. Only one melee fighter remained in the group, as the man's sword had broken during the previous attack, and he was not skilled in hand-to-hand combat. He saw how the tank was struggling, miraculously holding back the Gnoll Lord, and realized that the group had nothing left to fight with. The swordsman regretted not assembling a larger team and had hoped the dungeon would be simple. Moreover, if he won, he would have to split the loot among all the participants, which meant he would receive less reward. Suddenly, the swordsman heard a sound behind him and turned to check the source of the noise. He remembered that there was also an assistant on the team who usually did not participate in battles and only collected resources for the team. The swordsman could not understand how the man could calmly extract resources knowing that everyone would soon be killed by an unbeatable monster. The swordsman's attention was drawn to a tool that Shin was working on. The axe in the man's hand started to disappear as if slowly being erased from reality. It was a skill in weapon crafting often used by hunters and support. A plan began to form in the swordsman's mind, giving hope for escaping the dungeon alive. He decided to carry out the idea and called the assistant, who was extracting resources. Shin turned toward the voice, surrounded by a blue light that seemed to emanate from the man's body rather than from the background. The swordsman quickened his pace and frantically devised a rescue plan on the spot. Finally, the fighter reached Shin and asked if he could make a sword. Shin reluctantly admitted that this skill was part of his repertoire. The warrior asked for a powerful sword that would allow him to fight the Gnoll Lord. At first, Shin refused because he had voluntarily entered the dungeon as an assistant, not as a hero's support. The warrior lost patience and raised his voice, practically shouting that the entire team would soon die if Shin didn't help them. Meanwhile, the Gnoll Lord continued to pound on the tank's shield with powerful blows, putting the knight at risk of being killed in a matter of minutes or even seconds. Shin sighed in frustration, wishing he could gather resources quietly and develop his skills without being noticed. Ultimately, however, he agreed to forge a weapon for the team, albeit with conditions. He asked the entire team to forget about his weapon-making skills when they left the dungeon and expected to be rewarded as a hero's support rather than a mere assistant. The warrior was surprised by such boldness from someone who was not supposed to be a creator and worked as an assistant. Furthermore, all he asked was to provide the team with weapons. Shin smiled, not considering his service useless. He said that equipment was nearly half the key to successfully clearing a dungeon. Moreover, he was willing to vouch for the quality of his products even though his skills were not fully developed. The warrior, taken aback, listened to Shin, disbelief frozen on his face. After activating his skills, Shin extended his hand and offered the warrior assistance under simple terms. The large high-tech guild building named Overkill Guild gleamed under the midday sun. A girl hurried down the hallway, the sound of her heels echoing against the walls. She stopped in front of the large doors leading to the main office of the building. A young man, Craig, answered the knock and invited the visitor in. Lucy entered the large office of the guild leader and informed him that the Hunter Association had sent a request for cooperation. The guild leader explained whether the request was related to an error in the rating of the constructed tower. Craig knew that the association had no other choice and was ready to pay any allocated amount. After all, only one person could awaken and forcibly enter the sealed gate. Craig himself recognized the face of one of the team members featured in today's news report. He was certain he had seen the boy before and tried to recall when and where. Finally, Craig remembered details about the meeting place with the mysterious assistant recently. The guild leader had recently visited the area in front of a gate mistakenly rated very low, and Craig noted that survivors rarely returned from such gates. These cases could be counted on one hand. But this assistant was a member of the team that had survived the dungeon. Monitoring further developments, the leader inquired whether the girl had managed to acquire the requested equipment. Lucy revealed that she had not found a qualified weaponsmith but had managed to obtain a sword with a lower rating. The guild leader stated that he did not want to waste time with low-level weapons, as his skill destroyed blades one after another. Awakening in his chair, Craig swore that at this rate, he would exhaust his entire fortune on disposable equipment. The conversation was interrupted by a knock at the guild office door, and the girl stopped mid-sentence. The door was opened by a young man bearing alarming news, which he was instructed to deliver personally to the guild leader. Craig rose from his desk and walked toward the man, not expecting to hear anything positive. The assistant revealed that the dungeon had reopened with an incorrect rating, and this time, newcomers from the Overkill Guild were trapped inside. Craig responded that the situation was urgent and that inexperienced hunters should not be left to face their fate. He declared that he would go personally to rescue the team from the sealed gate. The sky over the city appeared surprisingly clear, with only a gentle breeze rustling the leaves in the trees and only the otherworldly sigh from the large gate disrupting the tranquil scene. A crowd of onlookers, suddenly gathered, recorded the gate with their smartphones. Attention turned to the three people who arrived on the scene. The flash of cameras followed Craig as he approached a young girl observing the situation around the gate and asked for a situation report. She replied that 9 people were trapped inside, one of whom was an ordinary assistant, and most likely all were already dead. Craig asked when the team entered the dungeon. The girl replied that about 2 hours had passed. The guild leader said he hoped to find survivors from the dungeon and would do his best to save them. Craig and Lucy stood in front of the large gate, its color reminiscent of fresh blood spilled on a battlefield. The guild leader tossed a heavy leather bag in front of the gate, something that would be needed by the man later. Meanwhile, he extended his right hand, signaling to Lucy to take action. The girl reached into the small bag hanging on her shoulder, and a bright beam of light erupted from it. Lucy pulled out a long katana, which could only be stored in her bag using subspace abilities, and handed the sword to Craig. The guild leader gripped the hilt tightly in his right hand, bringing the sword to his face and activating his unique skill. The katana blade burst into bright flames. Craig made a light swing with his right hand, slicing through the space in front of him, and a narrow fissure appeared on the surface of the gate. After using the separation ability, the crack in the gate gradually widened, and air began to whistle through. The katana used by the guild leader became covered in cracks, and the tip of the blade started to crumble into small pieces. He handed the now useless weapon to his assistant, who asked Craig to be as careful as possible. The guild leader picked up the bag that had been thrown on the ground and stepped through the gate. Craig reached the other side and immediately began assessing the situation in the dungeon. After a few steps, the guild leader stopped in front of the gate. A large room opened up before him, filled with the barely visible corpses of enemies lying in pools of green blood. Craig continued to study the room and noticed that the temperature and humidity were rising. This indicated that the guild leader was dealing with intelligent reptiles, as evidenced by the green blood stains on the ground. The man concluded that the dungeon was inhabited by human-like lizards, whose intelligence and combat prowess increased with age. These reptilian underlings seemed quite old, so their leader must be very experienced. Craig crossed the room, which had become a mass grave for the lizard men, in 2 leaps, and the guild leader rushed to assist the team as quickly as possible. He didn't want to lose any newcomers. Finally, he entered the hall where the trapped group was located. Craig stopped and his gaze froze at the scene unfolding in the room. A large lizard, comparable in size to an average adult, was preparing to attack with its sword. However, to Craig's surprise, a swordsman from the missing team managed to block the attack, crossing blades with the creature. An archer girl supported the fighter by shooting arrows at the enemy. Pierced by the projectiles, one of the lizards fell, bleeding from its side. Craig was astonished to realize that the group not only needed rescue but had also succeeded in defeating a superior enemy force.